Many people have told me they want to get into PvP because they love the action combat of Guild Wars 2, but they don't know exactly where to start, are afraid, or don't know where to find resources that are helpful. The purpose of this video is to give someone like that, looking to get into Guild Wars 2 PvP, these resources, answer some common questions, and clear up some misconceptions. So first of all, PvP in Guild Wars 2 is very accessible in terms of requirements. You can play PvP from the moment you leave the tutorial. Everyone has access to the same stats, so the grind in PvP is purely based on skill and not gear. So technically a new player is potentially as powerful as a veteran if they learn quickly. To participate in Ranked, you're required to be rank 20, which is a little bit of a grind, but that takes an average of 54 games to reach, which isn't really that much. Ranked rewards much more gold than unranked, which, while it's not as lucrative as farming PvE, it is much more fun, in my opinion, and there's no real diminishing return on it, unlike PvE meta events, which have a daily cooldown on their rewards. The ranked season lasts 2 months, and then there are 2 weeks of off-season. I usually play World vs. World in automated tournaments during this time. Ranked queues are limited to solo and duo, while unranked allows premates, but there is much less competition in unranked. Automated tournaments are the highest level of play in PvP, as they require a team of 5 to queue into, and they can give better rewards. The window to join these tournaments opens 4 times a day, so about once every 6 hours. There's also a monthly automated tournament, which gives very exclusive rewards. Other game modes include Stronghold, which is a scuffed MOBA style 5v5, and 2v2 deathmatch, which is currently not playable outside custom servers. Custom servers are player-controlled rooms that allow many different configurations to promote creative game types. For example, a King of the Hill 1v1 mode can be created by only allowing one person per team, so they would 1v1 and the loser goes to spectate and allows the next person to enter. These custom servers also allow players to host community tournaments in 2v2, 3v3, 5v5, Conquest, and so on. Dueling servers are also very common, which are rooms that will never begin the match, so players can practice their mechanics in a low-pressure environment. These are very useful for new players, and I suggest that they start here if they aren't very confident. However, ranked solo duo queue is where you will learn the fastest. One of the major issues I see with new PvPers is not that they're playing poorly, but they can't play well. And the reason for that is they don't have settings that allow them to do this. And having good settings, or settings that fit your personality or your playstyle, is important to not only being better, right, but also just having more fun. So some of the settings that I recommend include show skill recharge and health percentage, and these just make it more visible for you to see information about your team and the enemy team. Field of view on max, obviously, because you want to be able to see as much as possible. Sometimes you want to make it a little bit smaller so you can see certain animations, but usually that's not as important as having a higher field of view. You also want to enable free camera, so you can move your camera in ways independent of your character, so you can see what you want to see while moving in the way that you want to move, even if they're not in the same direction. And you want to disable camera shake because that's just distracting and it makes it harder to see things. You want to enable camera teleportation because that lets you see your next location after teleporting sooner. And you want to disable double tap to evade because you want to get a really good keybind for that instead of, like pressing your movement key and potentially dodging when you don't want to dodge. You want to remove auto-targeting and melee attack assist because they give you less control of your character, especially for using leap abilities. And as far as graphics, I make reflections and shadows the lowest before I change anything else for the best efficiency per graphics. For keybinds, I bind strafe to A and D, and I completely remove keyboard turning from those keys. So I give myself 2 more keybinds because keyboard turning isn't really necessary, because if you just hold your right mouse button, you can kind of turn your character like that, and then you just strafe. But if you really need keyboard turning for, say, like role playing, you can rebind that, and I put that on arrow keys, so that's sort of out of the way. But if I was like doing something not important, then it's still possible. You also want to get a really good dodge keybind, because dodging is one of the most important things in the game to have easy access to. So I put that on my mouse. Even if you have a mouse with very few buttons on it, I feel like dodge is one of the most important to put on there. You want to rebind most of your utility skills, so you're not clicking them as well. If you're skill clicking, you're just completely being slower than the enemy. You want to be as fast as possible, right? So your heal skill being on 6, I was kind of uncomfortable with that, so I rebound that to G. Also, E, Q, and X and Z are my utilities, but you can do stuff like R. I use R as auto run because it's just so much more convenient. But if you want to change that, that's feasible as well. Taking and calling targets is very important because of how the downstate works in PvP. You want to coordinate your attacks with your team. So you should always be pressing take target if you're unsure who to focus, and calling targets for your team if no one else is, because that just gets you into the fight to progress that kill faster than the enemy does. And having decent keybinds for this is really important because you want to be able to use your skills while also targeting people. You don't want to have the situation where you can't use a skill because you're trying to target. You want to be able to do both at the same time. So I use Shift T and T. Those aren't the best, but they're pretty okay. If you have a mouse with a lot of buttons, I'd probably put it on there as well. Stow Weapon is also an important keybind, which cancels your current animation to prevent your skills from going on full cooldown. So like if you know it won't hit or it'll do basically nothing, you can put it on a 4-second cooldown if you stow an ability before it's fully gone off. And I use left alt for that. Guild Wars 2 PvP is very build reliant. Most people play meta builds or meta skills and abilities and traits because they are the most reliable situationally and have a higher power level. As for certain classes that people should play in PvP for highest efficiency, that depends a lot on the meta. In general, Necromancer is very strong in lower tiers because it deals massive damage, but can also be a challenging class in higher tiers because it can be prey for assassins. Guardian and Warrior are also good for new players because they're versatile but simple to play. Elementalists and Engineers require more actions per minute, but can also be simple to play, so they're a bit more on the medium difficulty. And Mesmer and Thief are a lot trickier to pull off, as well as Revenant, because they're a lot squishier when they're not in the right situation, so they have to rely on their rotations a lot more than just purely mechanical skill. But they also have to rely on that as well. So if you're looking for meta builds, try godsofpvp.net or metabattle.com. But if you're looking to make your own build, there are a few things to know. I did a series on how to make your own builds if the meta doesn't appeal to you, which is linked below. In it, I show all of the 4 roles of PvP, the support, the damage, the roamer, and the duelist, and how to build for them and what universal things all builds need, such as condition cleanse, stun breaks, and some form of mobility. While the barrier to entry is very low for PvP, the knowledge requirement is really high. Simply killing your enemy is not the objective of PvP, because in the main game mode, Conquest, it revolves around a primary objective of capturing 3 nodes on the map. So controlling these nodes is not that simple because enemy players can overpower you if you're caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. Killing players is a means to capping those nodes, but there are other ways to get around that, such as the secondary objectives and rotations. One of the most common mistakes new players make is how they deal with defeated players. When an enemy is in down state, they are essentially powerless, except for rangers, always finish them immediately. Unless there is a potential for them to be revived by their allies, you want to get as much done while they're in that state. If you finish them immediately, they respawn sooner. Respawns happen 15 seconds after being fully defeated. So you want to keep track of downed or defeated enemies so you can abuse their absence from the map. Also, expect to have more enemies engage you if you're fighting near their spawn, which will mean you'll be in an outnumbered situation, which will be disadvantageous. New players should also focus on surviving more so than playing for nodes, because if they die, their team is now at a disadvantage while they respawn. Standing in the middle of a node constrains your movement and allows you to be easily focused, whereas kiting around terrain makes you much more difficult to kill. Find a good balance between taking risky and aggressive positioning while you have cooldowns, and playing safe and using defensive positioning while you are low on cooldowns. These are general tips for every role in PvP, but if you're looking for a more in-depth guide on the rotations and roles of PvP, watch my What is Rotation video. The rewards in PvP are mainly given out through the pip system. Winning and being higher rated can yield more pips, but these are generally obtainable by everyone. Pips translate into gold and PvP specific currencies, which can be used to get PvP only skins, or ascended or even legendary gear. Reward tracks also give players incentives in ranked and unranked queues. These can be unlocked and provide an alternative method to obtaining many PvE skins and currencies. This allows players to substitute PvP matches in place of farming living world maps to finish collections and achievements. For more competitive PvPers, the latter gives titles for reaching a certain rank, and automated tournaments give exclusive rewards, but only to the first place in each monthly tournament. Now I want to talk about some misconceptions that people have about PvP in Guild Wars 2 and in general PvP in any game. And the first misconception is that PvP is much more toxic than other game modes. Every game mode can be toxic, right? If I go to Auric Basin and I try to complete that meta event and I kill the boss too fast, the others are gonna respawn, right? And if I do that, I'm gonna get a lot of hate, right? And the same thing happens in PvP, right? So it's not like PvP is more toxic than others. It just puts people into those situations more readily, right? So it's more potentially toxic. And this is balanced by the urgency of the game mode. So if someone takes time to type in chat unnecessarily, they are basically wasting time, right? So if you're trying to win, you don't want to be wasting time. And obviously there's people who don't want to win as much as they want to be toxic, but that's something that you have to deal with. So like if I was in World v World, I've often had many people chase me for hours because there's nothing else to do, right? There's no objective. and then they just, run at me until I die, right? And then throw siege on my body. And then I ask them, hey, why are you doing this to me? And then they whisper me back and say, IBM everyone. So, players like that wouldn't really get into Platinum, right? Because they just wouldn't be good, and I would never see them. So this can still exist in PvP, but there's less time for those players to be able to do that, right? And players who consistently bring a toxic attitude can just be blocked. You shouldn't be focusing on the chat anyways. If you can see in my footage, my chat cover is very small because it is the least relevant part of my UI. My map is maximum size because that is where I should be looking, not at my teammates spamming chat. Now the next is pretty self-explanatory, but it's still a common mistake for new players, and that is capping a node with multiple people. It's just not necessary. Sticking together is good and all, but only one person is really required to contribute to capture progress of a node. So if your teammate is already capping, you can just go somewhere else that you're needed. Now, cheaters are a big issue representatively in all PvP games, and they should be punished, but in general, it's not that big of an issue. I think that people really overestimate the effect that cheaters have on PvP. And while it is true that people use hacks, they match manipulate, and they win trade, it happens everywhere. But the chances are, this will not affect your matches, as it is very rare, especially at lower ratings. You're not win trading to get gold, right? You're not win trading to get silver. You're going to be win trading to get God of PvP or legendary rating, right? So players who abuse the system are also doing this in very few matches, because once you're already at a high rating, it's better to just stop playing, right? So they will generally go on alt accounts and play fairly then. The current system is strict enough to prevent enough of this while not interfering with the freedom and enjoyment of the game mode for everyone else. So if we were to try to be more strict on cheaters, it would kind of affect all the other players more negatively, right? If we try to change the system. And then finally, the last misconception is that PvP is dead. While it's true that PvP is one of the less popular game modes and that a lot of the old competitive scene has left the game, there are always new people coming in looking to improve. Find people to queue with. Whether it's duo queue and ranked or an AT, everything is always more fun with friends. Even people who prefer to solo queue will get more enjoyment out of being in a guild or community. And there are more communities than you think on social media like Discord or Twitch or YouTube, and those can be a lot of fun, and you can find new things to do where you didn't think it was possible before.